When I was in class third, we moved to Delhi, Noida, which is part of Delhi. And I remember that as a city of buildings. And me and my brother, we started going to this big school called Delhi Public School. I think I liked going to the school, but purely because I had friends there. Partly because there were one or two good teachers. Sometimes you made friends with a teacher. But I don't think I really enjoyed school as a learning environment or really enjoyed the structure of the school per se. What I enjoyed was going to bookstores and buying books of my own interest. And I remember this small book when I was in class seventh or eighth that I bought on Life of Tagore, which was quite interesting, and how he had quit school and taken learning into his hands. And after reading that book, I also had this urge that, if I could also do something good for the world when I grow up. And so I told my parents that this is what I want to do. And so my parents and the others told me, if you want to do something good for the world, then one of the surest way of doing it is to become an IS officer. You will have power and control over people, and you'll be able to actually do wonders. So at that age, I decided, fine, I'll start preparing for IS exams. But to start preparing for IS, you need a degree. And so they told me that, well, if you want a degree, then why don't you go for one of the better degrees? And that's how I ended up preparing for engineering exam. No interest in engineering per se. I just wanted to get that degree and then move on to do what I really wanted to. And then came this 2 years of grueling experience of preparation for the exam for engineering. And there were moments in between when I would kind of feel that, once I'm done with the exams and once the results and everything is out, then I will probably start living the way I want to live and do what I really want to do. But that was not how it was supposed to be. After I graduate, after the results of the exam came, I was soon put out there by my family and friends as some hallmark of brilliance. And the overwhelming congratulatory odds that I received for next 5 years actually dragged me back into deception. Um, I now, I instead of connecting with my own self, I started looking myself just like the projection that was being put on me by the world. I now wanted to do an MBA from a reputed school. I wanted to start a company because I thought all these things were the in thing of the era. And so the 5 years passed with me dragging along, and then I got a job with World Bank. But soon after I got a job with the World Bank, within a year I realized that World Bank's definition of doing good and what I understood as what good for the society was vastly different. So I kind of realized that I'm not kind of a fit here. And also the kind of lifestyle that I started leading once I got that job, there was a discontentment that started to grow. And after about a year, I decided to leave the job. Actually, not just decided to leave the job, but I decided to quit the definitions, the usual definitions of success and failure, to try and live as I had lived when I was a kid, to start listening to my heart purely and see what is it that I really wanted to do. And the answers came pretty easily. There wasn't much that I wanted to do. I just wanted to lead a simple life, and I liked working with children. So I thought I'll start a school. And I went about and started asking the usual questions. So I want to start a school. I met people and asked them where to buy land from, and what are the usual nitty-gritties that you have to go through for registration, recognition, and all those things. But luckily, I met a person who told me that why don't we park these questions aside for a while, and why don't we look into what really education is and what learning is. He asked me what kind of school I wanted to start, for which I did not have any answer, because I thought there is only one type of school. I mean, you have Little bit of difference here and there, CBSE, ICSE, but basically a similar pattern that everybody is going through. So I could not really understand his question. But from that question started the journey of which began as a journey for 2 months, 3 months, and then I ended up traveling around for about 3 years, mostly without money, volunteering at different places. And during this journey, I went and stayed at different villages, met different tribal folks, spent a lot of time living in monasteries, trying to understand how the young Buddhist monks study. Um, Met many different kind of people who broke a lot of belief system that I was carrying. I met people who were graduates from so-called top universities, uh, likes of Harvard and Stanford, who were living in villages and doing farming and living a very happy and content life. This is something that I could never have imagined. Things like this happening. I came across spaces where children were living and learning freely. I mean, that is again something that I could not have imagined. That there is a possibility that a child might lead a life outside the four walls of an institution, learning the way he or she really wants to. And so a lot of beliefs, as I said, started to melt down. For example, one of the belief was the financial security. The time when I had quit my job, I kind of felt that anything below rupees 50,000 per month and I'll not be able to survive. But as I traveled and years passed, a lot of those things, I started to recognize that that fear was mostly psychological. It did not really have a good standing. It was, I think, a fear that was partly induced by the society. And for example, I started to question the whole structuring of schooling itself. Things that I had taken for granted. Now I just could not get my head around as to why. Is it that children from age 3 year onwards are put in a rigid regimental system where they do not have any say to what they want to study and how they want to study, or what they want to learn, how they want to learn, how they want to see the world as. I just could not understand. A 2 year old child learns so many things and tries to grasp things around the world with such eagerness and curiosity, and then we put a child into a system where everything has been designed for the child. Why is it that children of same age group are stacked together in a classroom is again something that I did not understand. I mean, we all understand that outside we all like to learn in mixed age groups from one another, and so do children. Then why do we make them follow these straight-jacketed norms when we outside are not satisfied with similar norms? I I basically started seeing that this schooling system that we have today is not the best one that we actually could have come up with to educate our children. I think there was some other reason why this system has come up with. We people who have come up uh, with brilliant symphonies, with unbelievable artwork, with innumerable myths and stories to explain the mystery of human life, I believe could have come up with something way better. In fact, something which is actually way much closer to how we all actually learn, how we people organically learn, not a kind of system that destroys the diversity of life on the planet, not a system that kills and smothers the curiosity of a child. Um, During my journey, more than the experts, I learned a lot from the so-called illiterates and uneducated people. As a kid, whenever I used to go to my village, I used to look down upon those people as backward, as poor and uneducated. I used to think that my father was from the village, and so I thought that my family has broken out of that thing and moved to city. And I hope that someday these people also would be able to break out of poverty and ignorance and their backwardness and actually come to city. That was a belief that I had grown up with. But 2 years ago, when my grandfather expired, I went and stayed with my grandmother for about a month. And this time I noticed three things. One, that not for a single moment was my grandmother alone. There were always 15 to 20 women who were sitting with her. They would finish their daily chores in the morning, prepare whatever food and all they had to prepare for the family, and then come and just sit with the grandmother till the evening. They would listen to her stories of her and her and grandfather time and again, and they would try to, and they would, whenever she would cry, they would, and this went on for a month. Now, how could somebody spend so much of their personal time with someone else? I did not have any idea. I was quite alien to this kind of culture, having grown up in Delhi. Where do children learn this from, and can they learn it in an education system? This such an important aspect of life. The second thing I noticed was that my uncles, which I had noticed before, that my uncles were communicating with their neighbor, who was both deaf and dumb in sign language. And I had noticed it before also, but I never questioned it. And now I asked my uncle, where did you learn the sign language from? And he did not understand the question. And after some time, he told me that, look, we grew up together, and so I learned. Now, that again, I was something that was difficult for me to understand, because again, I had grown up with an idea that at least, especially these specialized kind of things, you can only learn in institution. You cannot learn it on your own. I had grown up with an idea that that without the help of the institutions, it's very difficult to learn some of these things. The third thing that I noticed was the immense wealth of knowledge some of the illiterate and the unschooled people in the village had. The knowledge about the flora and fauna around, the knowledge about their own way of looking into life. And yet they had taken upon the identities that we have given them of being backward and poor. And this new word that just about, I think, a couple of days back, I was hearing one talk, and this person says that I am a first generation learner in my family. Again, I could not understand what do you mean by first generation learner in your family? You mean to say that nobody in your family, all the generations, had never learned anything, and that you, just because you have been to a school and college, you are the first generation learner of the family? So and this I saw with a lot of diverse communities all around the country. Communities that are so rich, are doing such meaningful work, artwork and all, and yet think of themselves as uneducated just because they have not learned rhymes and alphabets in a school. Like that, there is a small tribe I was reading about called Yanomamis. They stay in Venezuela, and they have been lately in news because they are fighting for their existence, like a lot of tribal people are. And I was reading about these people. They live in these large communal houses called shabanos. It's circular houses where a lot of families stay together. No hunter, it read, even today, eats the meat that he has killed. In fact, he shares out the meat with other people. Women tend garden and grow up to 80 varieties of crops. These people do not have a chief, and decisions are often made only by consensus, frequently after long debates. Children are not treated in any special way, not as some handicapped people who need our help, but as individuals with respect. Now, where would you put these people in this linear pattern that we are trying to follow with our education system? Where would we put these people as? I would have clearly put them as backward a few years ago. I would have called them backward for their alternative way of life, for their nakedness, for the fact that they have failed to keep up with the modern world, that they do not have knowledge of hospitals, of cars and internet and so on and so forth. And I think I would have also tried to set up a school for their children to inculcate them into a better way of life. But today I would not do so. In fact, I would rather want to go and learn from these people. Today I would also understand this Mexican writer, Jose Carlos Merils, when he calls these people as the last free people present on the face of earth, people who are still free from the influence of government, free from the influence of subliminal power of advertising, especially free from the influence of thoughts of other people. There's one such similar tribe here in India called Dongri tribe. They stay in the Niamgiri hills of Odisha. Again, I was reading about this tribe. Again, the tribe has been in news for the same reason, and I was reading about them and quite amazed to read that they have about 200 varieties of food, and they grow up to 100 varieties of crops. And last year, I met a lady who was working with this one such tribe in Chhattisgarh, and she had come out with a kind of method to work with the children there, which came out of their own way of life. And with this document, whatever she had come up with, she went to the government officials to say that can we read this, and can we have some of these incorporated, and can we actually debate over some of these points. And she told me that government officials, they just sidelined it, and they told her that no ma'am, how can we teach children about self-reliance and self-governance? So she said, but that's what the children have been learning here for quite well. I mean, it's there in their songs, it's there in their stories. That's what their grandparents have been talking about for generations. But he said that no ma'am, I mean, we'll have to do away with this. This will turn them against the state. I mean, if you want, we can include some of their songs, some of the dances in the curriculum, but let the curriculum remain as it is. Let's not fiddle a lot with the curriculum. The rhymes and the alphabets, children all over the country have been learning the same. And I think it's doing good, so let's continue with that. And I think she was not able to do anything further. She still stays there. I saw how this present education system is basically destroying the diversity of life on the planet, killing the many ways of knowing and learning and living that this planet had, and creating this one single kind of monoculture. That was one thing that I noticed, which I wanted to talk about. The other thing that I started to see was how this, which I mentioned before, how this system is basically making us feel handicapped. It's making us believe that you need help of institutions to learn, and that learning is not something that comes naturally to you. This again I learned from many different people that I met, but I'll share with you one story of this girl I met, Palak, in Ladakh. In Ladakh, outside the city of Leh, there is a beautiful place called Sekmol. In case anyone, if you happen to visit Ladakh, please go to that place. It's a wonderful place made out of local material. They have everything there runs with the solar electricity system. Quite a sustainable place they have created. What they do is they work with children for about a year or two. Children who have either failed in 10th or are going to take 10th exam, they take about 30 or 40 students, and then they work with those children. What they tell to parents is that we are going to prepare them for 10th, which they do, and that towards the end of first or second year, they would also become good in English. And so parents readily send their children. But the underlying thing which Sekmol does is it gives a lot of free time to these children. These children go and stay there and design their own curriculum and design their own timetable. How would they want to learn? What would they want to really invest their time? Some children spend a lot of time learning about the livestock there, some with the flora and fauna, some take care of the solar electricity system that I mentioned, and a lot of different things that are going on about the Ladakhi culture. And the time when I went to visit this place, this one whole batch was graduating at that time. And there was this girl, Palak, who I met, and she was showing me around different things, and I made good friends with her. And I asked her, where are you from? I thought she is from one of the villages nearby. And she told me that she is from a village in Jammu. And then I said that, how did you turn up here, all the way from Jammu? And she said, I ran away from my village in class 9th. And I had never heard of anybody running away from to join an institute at such a tender age. And in a couple of days, I got to know her better and her story better. She told me that as a young kid, she loved learning. She would go around in the village, and she learned so much about the plants and the life that existed in the village. With her grandfather, she would go out for walks in the morning and in the evening, and she learned a lot about the flora and fauna range. And when at the age of 8 or 9, she was put in a school, again, she was quite excited that here is a place where I would be able to learn so much more. But when she joined the school, things did not happen the way she had imagined. Suddenly, what all she knew about the life in the village, about things that she had learned as a kid, were of no importance there. Nobody cared in the school what she knew about the flora and fauna around. Nobody really cared if she knew what she knew about the little plant that was growing out in the porch outside the school. And there were these whole other things that were given importance to within the school, which to her were abstract, which she could not in turn relate to. And but unlike many of us who go through that learning as a ritual, and believe in this thing when the adults say that keep learning all these things because in future you will need all these things. You will not understand why you are studying them right now, but in future you will understand why you are studying them. But she did not go ahead with that ritual, and she decided to. Luckily, her brother was there in Ladakh, and he told her about Sekmol, and she decided to run away from her village and join Sekmol instead. And in that 1 year, it was she learned. She not only passed her 10th, which she could do easily, but she also learned so much about so many different things about the flora and fauna in Ladakh, about their culture, which she told me about. And we went and studied the solar electricity system that was there. She had been taking care of it for about 2 months. And I was kind of amazed to see the knowledge that she possessed. She told me things about AC and DC current, which I, having done my engineering for 5 years, could not really understand. She showed me that learning. She showed me again the same thing, that learning is very natural and it comes to us very naturally. It's not that somebody needs to be brilliant to learn things. Every person is brilliant. The only thing that you need is the readiness of heart and this thing that you really truly want to learn something. At that moment, as Einstein said, I think you just become a brilliant person. I asked her what did she enjoy learning the most, and she said the most was taking care of the cows and the livestock there, and learning how to milk the cows there. I like the way Aaron Falbel talks about learning. He says learning is as natural as breathing, and it doesn't really need to be tampered with or doesn't need any improvement. Uh, he writes that it is utter nonsense, not to mention deeply insulting, to say that we need to be taught how to learn how to think. We are actually born knowing how to do these things. I believe our freedom of learning is part of our freedom of thought, which is even more basic than our freedom of speech. No human right, other than the right to life itself, holds that kind of importance as the freedom of thought that a person has. And if we take away from a child the right to what he or she wants to be curious about at that time, and if we tell the child that you need to think about not what concerns and interests you at that time, but what interests and concerns us at that time, we basically destroy their freedom of thought. The other day, I was reading this article and it said, what would happen if a child arrives at this conclusion that what we see arrives faster than what we hear, himself or herself? The article read that for not only for a child, but any individual to arrive at this conclusion autonomously is both utterly profound and radically corrosive to power. It is utterly profound because it would lead to some very deep reflections on their place in the world. And it's radically corrosive to power because it tells the child that if something is true or not true does not depend on what a book or a teacher says. It solely depends on whether it is just actually true. It just depends on the truth of the matter, whether what we see really in fact does arrive faster than what we hear. It read how Socratic reflection is still being punished for the same reason that Socrates was executed for. Because the communities that surround the education system today are scared to let our children think freely. Because probably because for the socio-economic system that exists today, for that to survive, we do not really need free thinkers. We need more obedient peoples. We do not need dancers and musicians and artists on street who question things. We need workers in the industry, not people who have found out their own meaning of life, but people who have learned the meaning that we wish to teach. And probably that is the reason why schooling with a set curriculum decided by some experts and powerful people sitting somewhere is today being seen as a panacea and a hope for people world across. I mean, why else would a child who stays in Ladakh, a child who stays in Kerala, one in Cherrapunji, and probably some remote areas of Europe and Africa to be studying exactly the same curriculum, which has nothing to do with their own culture, which has nothing to do with their own way of life, with their own little geography, their own language. Like the Yanomamis, I think there are many diverse communities that stay just the place where we are. Many different kind of people that we meet when we go around. And I'm not saying at the least that these cultures and different people are perfect in any way. No, they are not. All I'm saying is that all of them exist. And all of them have their own special identity. But in the name of education, we are, I think, wiping out that diversity and painting everybody with the same kind of color. Tolstoy had once said about education, I think about 100 years ago, that education is tendency of one person to make another one just like himself or herself. Education is compulsory, forcible action of one person upon the other. Tagore writes of what he thinks education should be. He says, I believe that the object of education is freedom of mind, which can be achieved only through the path of freedom. Drawing from these two statements, I believe education would take a very different shape, if at all it takes some shape in future. If you ask me, I would rather like to imagine or work towards a space where there is no compulsory schooling, where children have space to decide for themselves in the care and guidance of adults, decide for themselves how they would want to take up their learning, where learning or knowledge is not boxed into four walls of any institution, where the diverse people like us, which includes artists, musicians, architects, social workers, designers, cobblers, farmers, are ready to provide the knowledge that they have at some nominal cost to other people, where knowledge that otherwise would be so freely available is not put in some grandiose buildings and sold to people at exorbitant prices. I would like to imagine a place where, irrespective of the age, everyone is a learner and everyone is a teacher. I had a privilege of working at one such space called Center for Learning for last 3 years. A space which for last 33 years had been putting out and challenging the structure of schooling, where children come and learn freely. We do not have any specific timetable. We are not affiliated to any board. Children come and take part in designing their own curriculum. They take part in designing their own timetable. We together decide what time to what time are we going to come to the place. It keeps changing every year. Every year. 2 years back, they used to come at 11:30 and leave at 5. Then they decided to come at 10:30 and leave at 4:30. This year we gather together at 9 o'clock and then leave at 3. Not something that adults decide and they have to follow, but they take part in deciding some of these things with us. Um, Let me end this talk here. I think we can take questions and I can talk about this space and my experiences there during the question answer session. But let me end this thing with a short story, especially for people who think that technology and not freedom of mind is the answer to the problem that exists in the system today. The story was written by Ravindranath Tagore about 80 years ago. It's called Parrot's Training. But the story that I'm going to share is a modified version of the same. It was modified by this person I learned a lot from called Manish Jain from Shikshantar, and then partly modified by me. In the parrot's training, we are told of a golden cage that is built to imprison and educate the wild and uncivilized parrot. In addition to the usual curriculum, she was also expected to learn to listen and obey. She was allowed to question, but within the structure, and not question the structure itself. First, as usual, the teacher started stuffing the parrot with the official textbooks. But that did not work. Days went by. Then a lot of creative people started coming in and started pulling in their ideas that, maybe if we do science a little differently, and if we put in some ideas towards mathematics like this, if we do not use a book and probably use an activity, then things would work around. UNICEF also came along with one of their creative projects and put it out in the school. There was a blip in interest that Parrot had in the education, but the blip just died as soon as it had come. Then again, the teachers got together and the whole education system got together, and they were kind of wondering what is wrong, and they came to this conclusion that, what we need is more investment. We need more money to be pulled into the education system. And so they approached different places, and World Bank came ahead and gave them a loan. And now a better and a bigger cage was built for the parrot. It also had a nice toilet. And a software company also came and gave Parrot a laptop and free Wi-Fi connection. But yet, somehow, there was no improvement in the way the parrot was learning all these things. Then, after a lot of intellectuals came in and started studying more about education and how to improve parrot's education. And so finally, after a lot of debate, Harvard researchers were invited to come in. And they came and conducted study on parrot's brain, on multiple intelligences. But what happened after that was that a lot of papers came out and books were written, but the parrot actually just remained where the parrot was. Again, no considerable improvement there. As her distress increased, parrot was given mindfulness training. They also started teaching parrot about child rights. And yet, somehow nothing was working, and the parrot was still in the same situation. And so a very concerned individual came ahead and said, you know what, I think parrot needs silence, time of silence, time for meditation. And that came as a big relief. And then, so an hour of silence and an hour of meditation was included in the timetable for the parrot. But that also did not work. The only thing parrot was not allowed to do was one little thing that the parrot wanted to do, and that was to leave the cage. Whenever she tried to break out, she was put in back. In fact, she was always scolded for being ungrateful and for being impertinent. They said, we are doing so much for you. We have spent so much of energy on you. We have spent so much of money on you and you don't even care. And you can't put in just a little bit of hard work into what we are doing for. Over the years, Parrot did end up learning a few things, but lost interest in the learning itself. She slowly became dependent on the very cage she earlier wanted to break out from. She internalized the fact that people around her were indeed doing her a favor, and that she and eventually her children too would need support of this wonderful cage. One day, accidentally, the cage was left open, but she was afraid to venture out. Her dreams were reduced to being a rat in the rat race. Slowly, her spirit withered away. And in the end, a lot of people made a lot of money on Parrot's education. Everyone benefited except the parrot. Thank you.